Welcome to my channel people. Author link will be on description, make sure to check it out. Everyone watched in awe as Bakuryo's eyes suddenly transformed into his Mangekyo Sharingan and he stared Kakashi directly in the eye, causing his face to freeze before his vision slowly darkened. From Kakashi's point of view, he barely had a moment to think, those eyes. Before he suddenly found himself in a dark space he didn't recognize, with Bakuryo floating silently beside him. Where are we? He asked in bewilderment, since he didn't recognize his unfamiliar space and he was doubting if Bakuryo used some kind of genjutsu on him, but the latter simply said, I need your help to locate her soul in the Pure Lands. Just think of your friend and call for her. Kakashi never heard of such a jutsu, so he concluded that it might be an ability that was related to the eyes he saw before they came here, just like his Kamui. After calming himself down, he nodded at Bakuryo and started calling for Rin from the bottom of his heart. Rin. Rin. Are you anywhere near? It's me, Kakashi. Kakashi kept yelling for a while, and he was about to lose hope when suddenly white strands of light started gathering in front of them and they slowly formed in the shape of none other than Rin Nohara, and she still had the same youthful appearance she had before she died. Kakashi. She was confused at first by the weird location she appeared at, but then her eyes lit up when she saw Kakashi, and immediately gave him a hug. Kakashi stood there in a daze before he started crying and hugging her back while repeatedly saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Rin calmly patted his head and said with a warm smile, you've grown a lot, you shouldn't be crying, and you don't have to apologize for anything, I made my decision back then. I'm the one who should be apologizing for causing you so much suffering and burdening you with my selfishness. Kakashi didn't answer and simply kept hugging her as he finally had a chance to solve his greatest regret, and only he knew how much it ate at his heart. The idea of killing his own friend. Seeing that he was still not calming down, Rin, who also had tears in her eyes and was crying silently, decided to try to change the subject and said, who's this boy? Is he from the Uchiha clan? Rin was surprised at Bakuryo, who had his normal 3-tomo Sharingan active before her eyes suddenly lit up, and said, have you become a teacher? Is he your student? Bakuryo had a frown on his face while Kakashi awkwardly rubbed the back of his head and said, no, he's a friend. Rin kept staring at Bakuryo curiously, before the latter got fed up with her and said, get ready, I'm going to revive you now. Revive me? Rin asked absent-mindedly, but Bakuryo didn't bother explaining to her any further as his eyes transformed again and suddenly, a white chain emerged from his hand and absorbed Rin gently, to the surprise of Kakashi, before he suddenly found himself back in the real world and staring at Bakuryo, whose eye was bleeding from using Yomi no Kuni. But for some reason, he seemed to still be in that dimension since he wasn't moving. Was I just imagining things? Muttered Bakuryo as he stared at the endless darkness around him with narrowed eyes. Just now, he felt something interfering with him, absorbing Rin into his chain, and he felt that Rin's soul was different from Minato's and Kushina's, but he couldn't pinpoint how. Unfortunately, my mastery with souls is very weak. I will investigate this more in the future, muttered Bakuryo before he left the shore of death as he called this dimension, and he heard Kakashi immediately say with a worried tone, is everything okay? Bakuryo nodded at him with a smile. Yay, don't worry. Before the same white chain he used earlier appeared again and entered Rin's head, although no injuries appeared on her body. And after a few seconds, her eyelashes started fluttering slightly before her body suddenly shook as if shocked, and she stood up immediately with wide eyes. Rin! Yelled Kakashi, Kushina, and Minato as they rushed at her while Bakuryo slowly retrieved his white chain. This was my first time testing this ability, but thankfully it worked, thought Bakuryo while staring at the chain that slowly vanished. This chain allowed him to connect more closely to the land of death, and he could even use it to drag souls from there to this world just like he did with Rin, and he can only use this thanks to his Yomi no Kuni reaching level 100. I need to evolve my eye. I'm starting to lose sight slowly and I can't keep going like this, as thought Bakuryo. After all, evolving his eye will make it completely recover, just like when he evolved Jikniniki. Meanwhile, different from the joyful atmosphere in Kakashi's house, somewhere in the Pure Lands where Rin had just escaped from and sitting on a throne made of bones with countless souls and spirits wailing around him. A man with red-orange hair that reached his shoulders and was swirling like flames suddenly opened his eerie green eyes as he felt someone managing to remove his brand on one of the souls. So, intrigued, he followed the location of that feeling with his gaze that penetrated through the veil of life and death before his eyes landed on Kakashi's house and on a boy in particular. It seems like this is the kid the master wants to add to his collection. Interesting, thought the man before he turned to his side and stared at a giant shadowy figure. This is the kid that sealed you with some weird power, right? Surprisingly, it was the Death Reaper that was standing beside him, and it obediently nodded at him, which made the man's eyes light up further in interest before he slowly closed them and returned to his lazy slumber. Such a dangerous man that ruled the world of the dead where the cries of the souls around him would terrorize anyone else, yet he simply laid there on his throne with a blissful smile on his red lips, a man forgotten by the history of this world, or maybe intentionally erased from it. And yet, he was only following someone else. Back at Konoha, after Kakashi helped Rin settle down, he went to visit Bakurio again and said that he was here to fulfill his promise and would always follow his orders if he ever needed him. Bakurio was surprised by Kakashi's sincerity, and after he left, he checked his system's quests and found that indeed, Kakashi was telling the truth as his quest that has always been 3/4 was finally completed. Quest Path of a Lord 3. Gain 4 trusted followers that won't betray you. Reward 10,000 points plus additional reward completed. He also realized that his quest Friend of the Protagonist 3 was at 3/4 progress since Kakashi's one of the main protagonists of the story. But he ignored this one for now and focused his attention on his rewards. You received 10,000 points, Taijutsu talent. Master Bakurio suddenly felt his understanding of all of his taijutsu and close combat techniques increase rapidly. This one is probably thanks to Mukai, thought Bakurio, and he imagined Mukai's smug face saying, "You are welcome," and quickly shook his head with a smile. Now that this is over, it's time for me to finish training the rest of the Sage Arts and Dark Chakra, and after I'm finished, I will see what to do about Obito. It won't be easy to convince him, of this I'm sure, thought Bakurio before he told Minato and Kushina that he was leaving Konoha to train for a while before. They go to Obito and they reluctantly agreed. Now then, where am I going to find my ride? He's been missing for a while now, muttered Bakurio since he didn't know where Kurama went to play after they arrived here, so he called him on a communication device he left him in case of emergencies. Yo Kurama, where are you? Soon after, the device vibrated and Kurama's voice came from it along with the sounds of explosions, just having some fun. Bakurio was surprised before he said, "Can you come meet me in Konoha?" After some silence, Kurama responded again, "Sure, I will be there shortly," and all the while, Bakurio could hear the sounds of explosions and the roars of wild beasts. Is this what he does every time I'm occupied with something? Thought Bakurio with a wry smile as he waited for Kurama by the gates of Konoha. It didn't take long for Bakurio to arrive at Orochimaru's hideout. The reason he visited this creepy snake was to give him another sample of his blood as well as give him a few instructions for the future. Bakurio-kun, I didn't think you would visit us so soon, said Orochimaru with his sick smile, and Bakurio simply shrugged and said, "Well, I can't keep having you spinning in circles with no progress. By the way, I also got you a sample of each bloodline I told you about just in case you didn't find them along with mine. That's good. Wait. You actually also have a blood sample of the Shadow bloodline?" asked Orochimaru suddenly, and Bakurio nodded at him, causing a frown to appear on Orochimaru's face. "Can't you tell me beforehand? I had to use a lot of manpower to search for it these past few days," he thought, but didn't say anything out loud and simply let out a sigh as he took the items from Bakurio to restart his research as soon as possible. Bakurio, of course, didn't get this bloodline from a member of the Shadow clan. Instead, he just bought it from the shop since it wasn't as pricey as an item of the Naruto world. But his heart still ached since he was patiently saving his points to buy a certain item. After Bakurio finished his delivery, he told Orochimaru about his desire to learn Snake Sage arts, and Orochimaru frowned slightly before he said, "The Raichi Cave have a certain trial before people could learn Sage mode there, but they mainly test people's heart for some reason through different genjutsu. But even if you pass those, it's not certain you would pass the final trial, which will be performed by the Snake Sage herself." "What happened when you went through it?" asked Bakurio, and Orochimaru sighed helplessly and said, "Although I say I failed, but I actually learned a lot from it because the trial was the reason I was able to learn how to transfer my consciousness. Anyways, to learn the Snake Sage mode, you will be injected with the Snake Sage nature chakra that would try to transform your body into a snake if you couldn't control it, and depending on your body and talent, you would either end up turning into a snake just like what happened to me, or you will suppress it and your body will evolve and gain snake properties that allow you to enter the Snake Sage mode in the future. I see, for some reason this feels weird, but I'm starting to understand a little bit more about this world, maybe just like how the different tailed beasts were created through the world's chakra and transformed into the shapes of different animals. These 3 sacred locations were probably meant to be this way. Maybe even the first toad sages and snakes were created through nature's energy as well, just like the tailed beasts. I see. Do you wish you could have completed the trial? Replied Bakurio, and Orochimaru simply grinned and said, I'm a scientist, and failure doesn't mean anything to me as long as I can improve from it, and as you probably noticed, I learned how to manipulate nature's chakra slightly from that moment, and after meeting that kid with a unique bloodline to absorb nature's energy, my curse marks are soon going to be perfect, and I shall achieve my dream of immortality. Bakurio can see the crazy desire in Orochimaru's eyes, and he simply said with a thumbs up, good for you, before he asked him about the location of Raichi Cave and if he can help reverse summon him to there, and he easily agreed with only one condition. If you are successful, I want to study your Snake Sage mode. It seems he still desired this power. Well, I don't mind, thought Bakurio, and nodded at Orochimaru, and the latter immediately bit his thumb, causing some blood to spill from it before he put his palm on the air in front of him, and many seal marks immediately extended from it before a huge explosion of smoke happened, and from it came the silhouette of a huge purple snake. His snake summoned Manda. Orochimaru, why did you summon me? Said Manda, who finished his sentence by hissing threateningly, and Orochimaru simply pointed at Bakurio and said, I need you to take him to Raichi Cave. Manda's eyes narrowed as he yelled, do you think I'm your transportation? And you want me to take such a weakling, no less? Kurama, who was sitting on Bakurio's shoulder all this time, silently felt insulted by this, but he didn't act as Bakurio held him back. Orochimaru stared at him coldly with a look that said, yes, that's what I want. Got a problem? And Manda got even angrier as he said with a twisted grin, sure kid, but I want you to get me 50 humans first. Bakurio's face was unchanging as he stared at the big snake, and he could sense its huge pride as well as twisted desire, so he calmly shook his head. What an idiot. What did you Cal? Manda was about to rebuke Bakurio, but the latter suddenly opened his eyes and stared right at him, causing Manda to freeze, and his eyes slowly turned into Bakurio's 3-tomo Sharingan. Kurama, wait for me here, I will summon you after I'm done with the trial, said Bakurio, and Kurama reluctantly agreed before he went to toy around with little Kimimaro to kill time. See you in a while, Orochimaru, said Bakurio coldly before he jumped at Manda, who automatically opened his mouth before they disappeared into a puff of smoke. This kid is really something. I wonder how his meeting with the White Snake Sage is going to go, thought Orochimaru with a faint smile before he stared at the blood samples Bakurio gave him and went to continue his research, ignoring the terror Kurama was about to cause to his subordinates. Somewhere in the world of ninjas, in a foggy place, a huge purple snake opened its huge mouth and a boy with 2 blood-red eyes slowly jumped out of it. This fog is some sort of formation, muttered Bakurio after noticing that the fog had traces of chakra in it that tried to affect his mind, but his reinforced heart easily dispelled its effects. Then he stared at a shrine-like building shining behind the fog. This should be the entrance of Raichi Cave, he thought, and started to slowly walk toward it while Manda followed him silently, still under his control. But just as he approached the entrance, a woman suddenly appeared in front of him and said in a pleasant voice, welcome traveler to Raichi Cave. I'm Tagarihime. You must be tired. How about you have some rest? Bakurio was surprised slightly since he was expecting to see snakes, not a woman. She has fair skin and dark hair that is tied into 3 buns, with 1 on the front of her head and 2 on the back. She wears a long, loose-fitting white robe that has green trimmings around the sleeves and neck area, with the neck area also having a green tomo. She wears a golden tiara that has green ribbons hanging from either end. Oh, I'm indeed tired of dragging this huge snake with me, replied Bakurio with a faint smile, and Tagarihime responded with one of her own. Please come in. I have some food prepared for such an occasion. That would be much appreciated, said Bakurio, still with the same smile on his face before he turned to Manda and said, You heard that Manda, she said you can eat her if you want, go ahead and have your fill. The moment he finished, Manda immediately attacked Tagarihime. What are you doing? She responded while skillfully dodging Manda's attacks. Well, you said you prepared some food, and Manda happened to say he was hungry before we came here, and what better thing to eat than a fellow snake, don't you think? Replied Bakurio with a smile as he watched Manda madly attacking her. Human, it seems you are not easy to trick, but don't think you can control our kind easily. Tagirihime's voice turned somewhat deep, and her face turned to that of a snake as she hissed at Bakurio before she dodged Manda's attack again. This idiot, falling to a kid's genjutsu. She thought before she suddenly bit Manda and injected something into him, causing his eyes to slowly turn back to normal. And the same happened with Bakurio's surroundings as the huge sparkling shrine in front of him vanished into smoke as well. As I suspected, everything was a genjutsu. It seems like the trials have already begun, thought Bakurio as he heard Manda yelling at him, "Kid, I will eat you. How dare you control me?" While Tagarihime said, "Stop Manda, he's my prey. I'm going to take my time eating his chakra." But soon a third voice drifted from out of nowhere. It was another woman. Tagarihime, the kid already passed your test, and the trial shall continue. As for you Manda, you should know better what happens if you interfere in a trial. TCH, I will find you again kid, said Manda threateningly while Tagarihime reluctantly left as well, leaving Bakurio alone in the fog. Is this seriously supposed to be their so-called trials? Bakurio muttered before letting out a sigh. He can easily see through these illusions thanks to his eyes, and when he entered that weird shrine, he noticed that the food Tagarihime offered him was all rotten and disgusting garbage which was turned through her illusion into delicious food, and she actually tried to make him eat, which is why he really wished Manda could have eaten her. After looking around him with a lazy look in his eyes, Bakurio noticed some lights in the distance and shrugged before he started walking towards them. Soon, the open terrain around him shifted into a catacomb-like terrain with many rock pillars and he saw a woman floating around like a ghost using them to hide from time to time. She has fair skin and dark hair that is tied into two buns on either side of her head. She wears a sleeveless white and blue robe, white sandals, and has a pearl bracelet on her right arm. She also dons a golden tiara and blue tomo-shaped earrings. She also has red eyeshadow. Bakurio watched as she kept appearing and disappearing all around, appearing to be observing him from every possible angle, and asked, "What's the next trial?" Looking at the cold look on Bakurio's face, the woman chuckled slightly and said, "You are quite the confident human kid. I can't wait to eat you while you are dying slowly." Her face turned into that of a snake, and seeing that Bakurio was only unmovingly observing her, she snapped her fingers, causing the terrain to shift again, and Bakurio found himself inside a closed room filled with some sorts of gems in all kinds of shapes and colors, and one of its walls had holes where those gems could be placed. My name is Ikikishimahime. You will have to fill that wall with gems around you. It's the only way for you to escape. Even killing me will not free you from here. Bakurio was thinking, should I kill her since it doesn't make a difference? And shot Ikikishimahime a look as some of his terrible killing intent escaped from him, and she immediately distanced herself from him with a startled look on her snake-like face as she asked, "Kid, you just had the desire to kill me, didn't you?" "I still have it," thought Bakurio as he reined in his killing intent and said with a shrug, "I don't know what you are talking about," before he ignored her and began analyzing the stones on the floor with one glance before chakra strings came from his fingers and slowly lifted the stones that matched the holes in the wall, and they filled it one by one in just a few seconds, leaving Ikikishimahime speechless. "How in the hell are you finding them so quickly? Is it your Sharingan?" she asked curiously as she returned to her human appearance, and Bakurio simply responded with a "who knows" look. "TCH, annoying brat," she muttered while Bakurio finished filling the wall, leaving only one hole. He didn't find a match for it. "Oi, little white worm, there's no stone that matches this hole," said Bakurio with a nonchalant look, causing Ikikishimahime's pale snake face to turn even paler as she replied with killing intent in her eyes, "What did you call me?" "Ah, never mind, you are useless," said Bakurio before he picked a few random stones that resembled the shape of the hole and easily cut them with his chakra strings and placed them in. "Here, done. Now remove this stupid illusion," said Bakurio, and Ikikishimahime glared at him once more and ominously said, "Your end will come soon," before she dispersed the illusion. Sigh. What a bother, muttered Bakurio before he suddenly tilted his head to the side, avoiding a sneak attack launched by the last hostess of the trials, which caught her by surprise since she didn't expect him to dodge with her presence completely hidden thanks to the weird fog covering Raichi Cave. But what she didn't expect even more is a punch that landed on her face and sent her flying away. Oh, finally an exciting test. Are you here to fight me? Asked Bakurio with a smile as the woman that just attacked him approached him with a dark face. Human, you are strong, but my test doesn't concern your strength, it concerns your heart and willpower. Sigh, so another boring test huh? Said Bakurio in disappointment, annoying the woman floating in front of him. She has fair skin and dark hair that is tied into a single bun on top of her head, which then transitions into a ponytail reaching her back. She wears a long, loose-fitting white and red robe as well as a long red dress beneath that. She wears a golden tiara and a necklace with 3 red tomo. And her beautiful face soon turned into that of a snake as she said, I'm Tagetsuhime, this is the final test. If you fail, I will make sure to enjoy torturing you and absorb your chakra before sending you off to the Pure Lands. She finished her sentence with a hiss before she disappeared. Their ego is really something, muttered Bakurio, and suddenly, silhouettes started manifesting around him. They were either people he killed and were blaming him for it, or the people he cared about telling him how selfish he was for acting without considering their feelings and whatnot, but Bakurio simply stared at everything without even responding. The 3 snakes he just met were talking to each other behind the fog. Why's he not moving? Is he too affected by the trial? Asked Ikikishimahime, and Tagarihime responded to her, is that surprising? My test is about self-control, something that the people who come here to seek to learn our sage arts usually lack. As for yours, Ikikishimahime, you test the resourcefulness of a ninja and if they can think outside the box when faced with a difficult decision. But both our tests are considered simple compared to Tagetsuhime's trial that tests the heart, which is where most of the people that come here fail. Tagetsuhime had a smug look on her face as she said to the other 2, it seems like I'm going to have a nice meal today. But suddenly, a voice drifted from behind them eerily, can we get this over with? That was so boring, and they heard a yawn behind them. The 3 of them noticed that the boy they were watching suddenly vanished, and they turned around hurriedly only to find him sitting beside them with a disappointed look. Why you? How did you locate us inside this fog? Asked the childish Ikikishimahime, and Bakurio simply said with a smirk, secret of the trade. Tagetsuhime frowned slightly before she said, congratulations. You passed all of our trials and earned the privilege of training our snake sage art. Please follow me to meet the white snake sage. Bakurio nodded and started following after her as the fog in front of them cleared and they arrived in front of the entrance of a temple, and this one wasn't some mere illusion, it was the place where the white snake sage resides. The white snake sage is waiting for you, said Tagetsuhime as she opened the door for him, and Bakurio nodded at her before entering. The temple was dark and illuminated by many candles placed on its dark walls, and there was a long flight of stairs in front of him that led to a huge throne where the biggest snake he had yet to see was sitting on it, or better say curled on. Bakurio slowly walked up the stairs until he arrived in front of the white snake sage and said, I'm here to learn from you the ways of a sage. The hostesses of trials appeared beside the white snake sage and listened in shock as the latter asked, Kid, you already learned the ways of the sage from those damned toads, why do you desire our way as well? What? He actually learned those toads sage mode. At such a young age. The 3 of them were actually hoping to get their revenge by watching Bakurio die from his inability to handle the white snake sage's injection of nature's chakra. But it appears that their hopes might not be fulfilled. Oh, you actually noticed. Amazing, muttered Bakurio, and he sneakily tried to appraise the white snake sage, but it failed similarly to what happened with the great toad sage. What was that feeling just now? Thought the white snake sage as he suddenly felt someone trying to pry into his very soul, but he barely blocked it. To answer your question, I haven't learned it from them. They weren't that fond of me in Mount Myoboku, but I ended up learning it from Jiraiya the Sannin, responded Bakurio with a shrug. You still haven't answered my question. You are already this strong, why do you desire more strength? Asked the white snake sage, and Bakurio simply said, I want to achieve my full potential, that's all. It would be a waste of a life otherwise, don't you think? Even if you risk your life for it. Asked the white snake sage, but Bakurio simply chuckled and said, don't worry, there are many things that can kill me in this world, but learning your sage arts isn't one of them. I like your confidence, said the white snake sage with a weird smile. Fine, you passed the trials anyway, so I don't mind teaching you. However, don't blame if you cause your own doom. But your majesty, he's already affiliated with those hateful toads. Tagatsuhime tried to change his mind, but he simply glared at her and said, I have decided. Then he turned to Bakurio and said, Are you ready? Bakurio sat down into a meditative state and took out one of his soothing incenses and lit it up before he nodded at the white snake sage. We can begin. Interesting. This kid's destiny is interesting, he thought before a small white snake appeared from his huge body and made its way to Bakurio's before it bit him in the neck and began injecting him with its nature's chakra. Bakurio frowned slightly, but that was all. His pain tolerance was enormous and he soon focused all his attention on the huge amounts of nature chakra that was injected into his body and was trying to turn him into a snake. But he was used to this, and with his chakra control, and experience with nature's chakra, as well as his Asura's chakra and recently acquired nature's blessing. Bakurio started slowly controlling this new nature chakra and merging it with his body and spirit. Time slowly passed by as Bakurio kept sitting in his meditative state. Sometimes his skin would turn white with some snake scales appearing on it before it would turn back to normal. At other times horns would appear on top of his head before they disappear. This went on for a whole week before his transformation stopped and he had a stable green aura swirling around him like a chakra cloak with some chakra snakes appearing from time to time. Impressive, what a genius, thought the white snake sage as he sensed that Bakurio's transformation was complete and he slowly opened his eyes while still in his snake sage transformation. This feeling is great, muttered Bakurio as a notification appeared in front of him. Congratulations on learning the Snake Sage mode. Snake Sage mode level 10. Grants 100 AGI plus 65 plus 20 STR, not bad. Once I reach level 100 with it, my agility alone would be increased by 1000. Thought Bakurio delighted. Congratulations. You can stay here for a while to get used to this transformation. The nature energy here will be quite helpful to your training, said the white snake sage, and Bakurio nodded gratefully. Thank you. I will be summoning my summon to stay with me. I hope it's fine. Don't worry, as long as it doesn't cause trouble with the rest of our snakes. Bakurio nodded at him and left with Tagatsuhime, who appeared out of nowhere and led him to a room where he can train, and the shock on her face was very clear. Just how did you do it? She couldn't help but ask, since what the kid in front of her did was unheard of, mastering 2 sage modes at once. And one of them in the span of a week. I was just lucky, replied Bakurio, and Tagatsuhime hissed at him and said, like hell, something like this could be done with just luck. You are probably hiding a lot of secret. She was almost drooling while staring at Bakurio, but he wasn't interested in explaining to her about his secrets and was pondering instead. This went faster than my training with Jiraiya. The location's truly important for such training and my newly gained abilities also helped a lot. After leading him to a room and taking her leave, Bakurio suddenly bit his thumb and used the summoning jutsu. And he summoned none other than Kurama, which he established a contract with, and if the white snake sage knew such a dangerous creature would be summoned to their home, he would have never accepted Bakurio's request. Kid, what took you so long? Said Kurama with an angry look on his face, and Bakurio said with an apologetic look on his face, sorry, I didn't think it would take this long. Sorry my ass, said Kurama before he stared at their surroundings curiously and asked, so this is Raichi Cave, huh? Yay, there are many big snakes here for you to play with, go have some fun, and pay extra care to that purple worm Manda, play as much as you want with him, said Bakurio with a wicked smile, and Kurama replied with one of his own as he said, don't worry, I was thinking the same, before he suddenly vanished and went to find another pitiful prey for him to play with other than poor Kimimaro. Now then, let's the training begin, muttered Bakurio as he began grinding to level up his snake sage mode as fast as possible. Very quickly, 3 whole months passed and Kurama was already back in Konoha after he caused too much trouble and the white snake sage was forced to banish him from Raichi Cave. Today, Bakurio watched as the level of his snake sage transformation reached 100 and he was very satisfied. Snake sage transformation level 100. Grants the user plus 1000 AGI, plus 6005, plus 200 STR, but this wasn't all, as many of his other skills and masteries reached level 100 since he spent a lot of his time training with the snakes. These included his close combat mastery, chakra control mastery, meditation mastery, nature's chakra absorption, and so on, and he received many rewards from them which raised his battle strength to a whole new level. And thanks to his new taijutsu talent, all of his taijutsu skills reached level 100 except for his 8th gates jutsu, which was at level 40, allowing him to open the gates all the way to the 4th one. I have many advancement quests to fulfill now, thought Bakurio as he read through his quest details. His close combat mastery reaching level 100 granted him an increase of 100 points in all of his physical attributes. That's the same as gaining 500 attribute points at once. But the advancement quest he received from it was quite tricky as well. He had to defeat someone that was at least 10 times stronger than him and thrice as fast without relying on anything other than his close combat mastery, and this will happen in a special dimension created by the system where all his attributes would be reset. As for the chakra control, it granted him an ability called Chakra Merging, and according to the description of the skill, some types of chakras have a high possibility of merging, which will result in the creation of a higher form of chakra. This was one of the reasons why he quickly trained his Snake Sage mode all the way to level 100. However, he found that he couldn't merge the snake's nature chakra and the toad's nature chakra as they kept rejecting each other for some reason. As for the quest he received for his chakra control to advance, it required him to use chakra merging to create a higher form of chakra that's at least 50 times better than normal chakra. This was a huge task. And then there's his meditation reaching level 100 and granting him the ability, One with Nature. It allowed Bakurio to increase the training speed of his spirit and nature-related skills by 500%. But to increase his mastery any further he had to finish a quest that required him to find a natural treasure of at least legendary rank and absorb it. Time to leave, muttered Bakurio, who was absorbing nature's chakra passively thanks to his nature's chakra skill reaching level 100. Before he walked outside of his room and was surprised to see Tagatsuhime waiting for him in her human form. Bakurio-kun, the white snake sage wants to see you before you leave, she said, and Bakurio was slightly surprised. He really has ears all over this cave. Tagatsuhime giggled slightly and said, of course, please follow me. Bakurio nodded at her and followed silently. He didn't want to get too close to these snakes that appear friendly on the surface while inside, they were snakes. Once they reached in front of the white snake sage, the latter couldn't help but let out a long sigh and said, Kid, you are truly an anomaly, mastering our sage arts in such a short period of time, you remind me of him. Bakurio tilted his head in confusion and asked, what do you mean by him? The white snake sage let out a sigh and said, the Sage of Six Paths, Hagoromo Otsutsuki. Bakurio felt as if a bomb exploded on his head as the gears inside of it began turning at a terrible speed. Hagoromo learned the Snake Sage mode. Don't tell me it seems I was right, you knew about the sage, said the white snake sage with a grin before she dropped another bomb on Bakurio. Do you know why he's called the Sage of Six Paths? Bakurio shook his head and the white snake sage slowly said, it's because he mastered all the sage arts this world had to offer and merged them together. Bakurio's mouth opened slightly. He had a similar idea himself, but he never thought this was how Hagoromo gained his own legendary strength. But wait, doesn't that mean there are 6 sage arts? Toad, Snake, Slug, but what about the other 3? Do you have any idea what the other 3 sage arts are? Asked Bakurio, and the white snake sage chuckled slightly and nodded before she said, I do indeed, but why should I tell you? Damn it, this snake will definitely ask for a high price for this information. Time seemed to stop around Bakurio as he thought, what's the commonality between the different sage creatures? They have sacred grounds, that's a given, but most importantly, they can talk. But I don't know all the animals that can talk in this world. Bakurio frowned slightly before he concluded, let's see what's his price first. I'm already in your debt for allowing me to train here, so I don't mind helping you if it's within my capabilities, said Bakurio. This was indeed how he felt, and the white snake sage smiled warmly at him. If a snake could have such an expression, but it was clearer on Tagatsuhime's human face, who for the first time didn't find Bakurio annoying. Kid, I was always blessed with the ability to sense people's destiny, but for some reason, I failed to read yours as it was hidden by a darkness. Bakurio frowned slightly and said, I see, but don't worry, no matter what the future holds I will just face it when the time comes. The white snake sage nodded at him before she said, please assist my Raichi cave in the future if we ever need it. Oh, this is quite simple. thought Bakurio before he nodded and easily agreed, which made a smile return to the white snake sage's solemn face. Now then, I'm sure you are quite curious about the identity of the other 3 sage arts locations. Bakurio nodded at her and she began explaining. The reason why people don't know about them is because they are rarely open to outsiders. In fact, my Raichi cave is the only location of the 6 that's open to the whole world and willing to teach sage arts. The other 2 you probably know thanks to your village, Mount Myoboku, and Shikatsu Forest, are only open to people who are somehow connected to them throughout the history of this world. The white snake sage paused here and explained to Bakurio the selection process of these sacred grounds. Katsuyu, the owner of Shikatsu Forest, only accepts those that are either extremely skilled in medical arts or have bodies that are compatible with her sage transformation. As for the toads from Mount Myoboku, they only accept people who that old geezer sees in his prophecies or are related to the direct bloodline of the sage, and the rest of the sage beasts follow similar procedures. Bakurio nodded at the white snake sage, and he felt like he was beginning to understand why it was very rare to find sage art users. As for the identity of the other 3, they are the dogs protecting the gates of hell, the monkeys from the Mountain of Flowers, and the turtles of the Dragon Palace. Aren't all of these animals somehow related to Konoha? Bakurio suddenly remembered Kakashi's dog Summon Pakun that was different from any other dogs he saw or heard of from the anime, since he can talk and he always found it weird. And then there's the Monkey King Enma, Hiruzen Summon, and Guy's Turtle Summon Ningame. Damn, just what's so special about that village? This can't be a mere coincidence. Don't tell me, is Hagoromo doing this on purpose so someone can follow in his footsteps and unlock his sage transformation? Nah, probably not. He would have interfered with Black Zetsu's plans if he could affect the world this much. Seeing the thoughtful look on Bakurio's face, the white snake sage didn't interrupt his thought and waited calmly for him to digest this information. Thank you, said Bakurio gratefully, and the white snake sage said with an evil grin. Let me know if they don't agree to help you. And Bakurio responded with one of his own. Don't worry, I'm good at talking and convincing people. Tagetsuhime, who was listening to them, remembered how Bakurio made it his routine to beat Manda and any snake that tried to help it when he was training his taijutsu, and couldn't help but shiver. You are good at talking with your fists indeed, she thought as she watched Bakurio calling the now obedient Manda over and used it to reverse summon himself back to Orochimaru's base. Meanwhile, inside the temple, Tagetsuhime couldn't help but voice her worries now that Bakurio was gone. Your Majesty, are you worried about the darkness you saw? The white snake sage remained silent for a while before she closed her eyes and muttered, It's not the vision that worries me, it's what I do not see. Hearing this brought an ominous feeling to Tagetsuhime's heart. At Orochimaru's hideout, a huge cloud of smoke suddenly covered the whole place as a huge purple snake manifested itself and a boy dressed in black came out from inside of it. Bakurio-kun, you are back already? Asked Orochimaru, who sensed the presence of his summon nearby thanks to the contract between them, and went to greet them, and Bakurio nodded at him. It has been a while, Orochimaru. I believe you mastered the snake sage art since you are already here, said Orochimaru with shining eyes, and Bakurio replied with a weird smile. You want to test its might? Orochimaru nodded with an excited smile, and Bakurio calmly activated his level 100 snake sage mode. A strong green aura covered Bakurio's body like a cloak, and if someone looked closely, they would have seen that the strands of chakra flying through the air were made of small snakes. Orochimaru readied himself by taking out a sword from his mouth as he heard Bakurio say with a smile, Here I come. But Orochimaru's smile suddenly turned into absolute shock as Bakurio moved with a terrible speed that he could barely react to, and a punch connected with his stomach and sent him flying away through the walls of the hideout. This was the advantage of this sage art. Speed. Absolute speed. And this was only using the sage chakra without mixing it with something like lightning chakra to empower the power of certain jutsus like the lighting chakra cloak. It seems I can fight the strong now without my eyes, muttered Bakurio before he frowned as he noticed that he was already down to only 90% of his chakra. But the consumption is still too much. Retendering prolonged fights my biggest weakness. That was amazing, muttered Orochimaru, who climbed from the rubble and stared at Bakurio with a crazed look in his eyes, unworried about the pain he was feeling from his caved-in stomach. Bakurio glanced at his hands and the damage he dealt to Orochimaru before he said, Unfortunately, I'm limited by my own chakra reserves, otherwise I would be even stronger than I already am. Orochimaru nodded at this before he said with a smirk, "Don't worry, once our experiments are over, you will gain enough chakra reserves and much more to spare." Bakurio nodded at him as he knew Hashirama's bloodline would give him a huge boost, so he asked, "How long will it take for the final product to be ready?" Orochimaru pondered slightly before he said, "I'm not sure. The complexity of the Uchiha and Senju's bloodline makes them very hard to mix to begin with, but then you have other bloodlines which further increase the difficulty of the operation. I guess it's logical. It took Madara decades for his bloodline to fully merge and he unlocked the Rinnegan at the doors of death," thought Bakurio before he said, "Don't worry and just do your best, and invest some more effort into teaching Kabuto. I think he's going to be the key for this operation to succeed." Orochimaru was surprised at first before he stared at Bakurio's eyes and responded, "It seems like you assessed Kabuto's potential better than I did. Don't sell yourself short. Your vision is also nothing to scoff at," said Bakurio, and Orochimaru chuckled slightly before he said, "The current synchronization rate is at 30%, and it seems like studying each bloodline individually helped greatly. However, the higher the synchronization we achieve, the harder it's to raise it further, and the difficulty is actually scaling exponentially. It's okay, just keep it at one step at a time. Hopefully, you will be done by the time I finish my training," replied Bakurio before he quickly left his direction, Konoha, the village that was hiding so many secrets. "This kid never rests," muttered Orochimaru, but Kabuto suddenly appeared from the shadows and said, "And so are you, Orochimaru-sama. Hehehehe. Why didn't you appear earlier?" asked Orochimaru, and Kabuto simply shrugged and said, "I will appear in front of him when I have the results he seeks," before he disappeared back to his lab. "This kid," muttered Orochimaru before he looked down at his caved-in stomach and said, "Oh, that's right, need to fix this body," before he slithered away back to his lab. Back at Konoha, the situation was very peaceful, especially after the problem with the Hyuga clan was settled and Fugaku's position as Hokage was cemented, so there were no more major threats of a rebellion happening or something like that. After Bakurio arrived, he visited his friends one by one before he went to the Hokage's office, since he guessed that Kakashi was somewhere there, or at least Fugaku knew where he can find him. "Bakurio, you are back," said Fugaku with a smile, and Bakurio smiled back and said, "Yay, it has been a while, Fugaku. How's the situation in the village so far?" Fugaku turned to Shikaku, who was standing calmly beside him, and the latter said, "So far everything appears to be fine. On the surface at least. There are some undercurrents in Kiri. Some clans are showing signs of rebelling under the tyrannical rule of the 4th Mizukage. Meanwhile, Iwa is acting less aggressive for some reason." When Shikaku said this, he shot Bakurio a meaningful look before he continued, "There's nothing new occurring in Kumo. As for Suna, they are still on good terms with us, but there are some rumors that their Jinchuriki is losing control often since he's still a kid." I see," replied Bakurio as he thought, "It seems I didn't miss anything major while I was away," before he suddenly asked, "Do you happen to know where I can find Kakashi?" "Oh, Kakashi should be returning from a mission tomorrow. He was sent to investigate some type of weird events near Taki and he should be back soon." "I see, I will be going then. Tell him to contact me once he's back," said Bakurio before he left. "He seems busy," said Shikaku to Fugaku, and the latter simply sighed and said, "It feels like he's gotten stronger as well." Shikaku was surprised by this but just hoped that this would be a good thing for their village. After Bakurio left the Hokage's office, his next destination was Tsunade's house. Bakurio knocked on the door, and shortly after, her apprentice Shizune opened the door for him, and she was pleasantly surprised as she rushed to hug him and said, "Bakurio-kun, you are back. Please put me down, Shizune," said Bakurio in annoyance, causing Shizune to reply awkwardly, "It has been a while." "Indeed, is Tsunade here?" he asked, and Shizune nodded and was about to invite him in when they heard the sound of footsteps, and Tsunade's voice soon followed after as she said, "What's all this noise early in the morning?" Bakurio raised his head and stared at the shining sun, indicating that it was noon, and Shizune awkwardly said, "Lady Tsunade, it's Bakurio-kun." Hearing this, Tsunade's eyes lit up slightly and said, "Oh, come in." After sitting in front of each other, Tsunade was the first to talk. "I heard from Minato that you met Orochimaru." "Damn you, Minato, and your loud mouth," thought Bakurio in annoyance before he said, "Indeed, he's as creepy as the rumors describe him." Tsunade nodded before her eyes narrowed slightly and said, "Why did you approach him instead of asking me for help?" "Well, you're a great doctor and he's a great scientist. Duh, thought Bakurio, but he said, I needed his help to locate Raichi Cave. I went there to learn sage arts from the White Snake Sage." Tsunade's eyes widened slightly as she said, "Haven't you learned sage arts from Jiraiya?" "Yay, and I actually visited you for this reason. Can you summon Katsuyu?" "I wish to learn her sage arts as well," said Bakurio, and Tsunade's mouth almost fell open. "You want to tell me you mastered 2 sage arts? This is a crazy achievement." Tsunade almost yelled out loud while Shizune could barely get out of her shocked state and said, "Bakurio-kun, you are amazing. Not only amazing, even that bastard Orochimaru couldn't learn the snake sage arts, and the same with Jiraiya since his sage transformation is still flawed," said Tsunade in astonishment, leaving out that she also failed, and having something to compare with caused the shock in Shizune's eyes to grow even bigger before her eyes lit up weirdly. After calming down, Tsunade said, "You want to learn sage arts from Katsuyu, right? Although I'm sure she would agree if I ask her for this favor. Unfortunately, her sage arts are extremely hard to train and have extreme demands on the body that even I didn't meet. I will summon her and you can ask her directly. That would be much appreciated," said Bakurio with a grateful nod, finding Tsunade's words matching that of the White Snake Sage. Tsunade pricked her finger slightly before she summoned a small version of Katsuyu that could sit on the palm of her hand. Bakurio stared at the white slug curiously as it spoke with a feminine voice. "Tsunade, why did you summon me? Is everything okay?" Tsunade explained to her what Bakurio wanted and asked if she could do her a favor and teach him her sage arts. Bakurio was really grateful for how Tsunade was helping him without asking for anything. Meanwhile, Katsuyu stared at Bakurio before she approached him and said, "So you are Bakurio-kun, I heard a lot about you but we never got the chance to meet. Well, here we are," said Bakurio with a smile. "Learning my sage arts probably has the strictest requirements in all the sage arts. Let me see if your body and blood are fit for the training, otherwise you will simply die," said Katsuyu, and Bakurio nodded and watched how she slowly crawled over his body until she reached his shoulder and began shining with a gentle green light that covered his whole body. "Is this some kind of scanning ability?" thought Bakurio in wonder as he watched the light moving across his body in waves without interfering before it completely vanished, and Katsuyu said, "Unfortunately, your body isn't suitable to learning my sage arts." Hearing this, Bakurio wasn't disappointed at all, unlike the looks on Tsunade and Shizune's faces, as he thought, "Even my strong body isn't enough, huh?" Before he said, "Please explain to me why." Katsuyu was surprised by how calm the boy in front of her was acting, and she couldn't help but give him a nod of her head. If only he had a suitable body, he would have probably been able to learn and master my sage arts just like Hashirama did back then. From what was explained to me from Tsunade, you actually managed to learn the snake sage's art and withstood his injection of nature's chakra that tried to change your body. Incredible. It must have been a miracle for him to withstand the White Snake Sage's injection, she thought. Bakurio nodded at her. "That's right. And it was indeed very difficult since my body was still not up to the standard that could handle that amount of chakra, and if not for me being already experienced from training in the Toad Sage arts, I would have definitely lost control and became a snake. And the fate that would have followed after would be swallowed by the White Snake Sage," thought Tsunade with a horrified look on her face when she heard this, and she immediately rebuked Bakurio. "Why did you do it if you knew your body wasn't up for it?" Bakurio didn't know how to explain to her about the powers of his system and could only say, "I didn't know at first. It actually took me by surprise since that White Snake Sage didn't bother explaining much to me, and I'm sure his other snakes would have loved to see me turning into a snake and getting devoured, so they weren't of much help either." Tsunade's face was full of anger as Shizune tried to calm her down, as Katsuyu instantly said, "Indeed, the snake sage arts are extremely difficult to learn, but my slug arts are much more troublesome to master, because they affect your blood. Your body won't change, but every drop of your blood will start turning into my own clones if you aren't careful or lose control in the slightest. But no human can split his control of chakra to such an enormous amount. You will be facing certain death if you try, unless you have a very special body like Hashirama's, who had a terrifying vitality, and it wasn't easy for nature chakra to transform his blood cells, which is why he was able to weather the storm and succeed in learning my sage arts." Bakurio listened calmly to all of this, and when she was done, Tsunade suddenly let out a sigh and said, "Once I tried to learn sage arts from Katsuyu, and I even had Jiraiya borrow the staff the toads used to teach sage arts as a measure of safety since it can disperse nature chakra when hit by it. But I still failed miserably and almost lost my life. Please don't act recklessly, Bakurio-kun." Bakurio could see the clear worry in Tsunade's eyes, and Shizune soon butted in afterwards, and she kept trying to change Bakurio's mind as the latter thought, should I wait until I get Hashirama's bloodline? This is troublesome, thought Bakurio before he stared at all his abilities and the certain items he has that could help him. I should be able to take quick control over my body, but I might need to add certain measures of protection just in case. Thought Bakurio as he took out a cleanse potion from his inventory and said, I still want to try it, but don't worry, I'm not going to throw my life away. In fact, this potion here can nullify any negative effects that a failure could cause, which is why I'm confident in at least trying and surviving this ordeal. Tsunade stared doubtfully at the potion on Bakurio's hand before she took it and carefully examined it, and she tested a drop of it to see if the effect was just like Bakurio described, and her eyes couldn't but light up in astonishment seeing that he wasn't lying. But despite all of this, she was still worried. Katsuyu watched silently as Tsunade contemplated silently before the latter stood up and pointed at Bakurio with an angry look. Fine. But be sure that if anything happens to you, I will make sure to beat you up. Bakurio grinned at her and said, Don't worry, it's not easy for me to die. And Katsuyu tried to comfort Tsunade. Don't worry, Tsunade, I will stop the process if I feel he's having any problems. Tsunade nodded at her, and soon after, both Katsuyu and Bakurio disappeared to Shikatsu Forest. Do your best, Bakurio-kun, muttered Shizune, while Tsunade only waited worriedly. After arriving at Shikatsu Forest, the first thing Bakurio noticed was the huge trees that were completely pale white and thin, appearing to be almost made of bones, and it gave this forest an eerie feeling. But he could feel the rich nature energy floating in the air all around him, and he was sure that they arrived at the right place, and it was only further confirmed when an enormous version of Katsuyu appeared in front of him. And this one even dwarfed something like Kurama at his full size. So, this is your true body? Asked Bakurio, and Katsuyu replied with a gentle voice, Welcome to my Shikatsu Forest. It has been a while since I had a guest. Please take a seat. Bakurio nodded and followed the smaller version of Katsuyu that brought him here to a small resting place in front of the gigantic Katsuyu that was made from the huge white leaves of the bone-like trees, and he sat down before he handed the potion to Katsuyu. If something goes wrong and I lose my ability to move, please help me drink this potion. No problem. As long as you are confident in its effect. She replied again with her gentle reassuring voice, and Bakurio nodded at her with a smile before he lit up a soothing incense and said, Let's begin. The moment he closed his eyes and entered a meditative state, Katsuyu felt as if he became part of the natural energy of Shikatsu Forest, and he blended perfectly with it as if nature itself was embracing him. Incredible, to reach these kinds of level of synchronization with the natural energies of the forest so quickly without any hindrance. It's as if the forest itself want him here. What kind of gift is this? Katsuyu was flabbergasted since she never witnessed such a thing, but she quickly got herself out of it and ordered the small version of herself beside Bakurio to inject him with its nature's chakra. If someone put that chakra that was entering Bakurio's body under a microscope, they would have noticed the creepy scene of countless slugs resembling Katsuyu entering his body and trying to change and devour his very bloodline. Bakurio frowned slightly when he noticed this change or changes. Since many areas of his body were affected at the same time and started losing control slowly. Everywhere his blood flowed, it was slowly being transformed, and he had to quickly regain control over it. But some places were affecting him a lot, especially his brain. However, he took a huge breath of the soothing incense to calm his mind and body, and it even affected the slightly raging natural energy in his body before he used his multitask ability to its fullest potential and started wrestling control over his body and slowly absorbing those slugs into his blood rather than it being the other way around. This went on for hours, and Katsuyu watched with a worried look on her slug face, and she even tried to interfere many times when she sensed Bakurio losing control. But every time, he somehow finds a way to regain control over the situation until the 10 hours mark was hit and Bakurio fell face down on the resting place with black marks covering his face and he whispered weakly with a voice full of exhaustion, "I did it." Before he drifted away into a long slumber with a huge grin on his face. "This kid. You can stop worrying now," said Katsuyu as Tsunade suddenly appeared from behind her and let out a long sigh before she picked up the unconscious Bakurio and stared at him for a long time. "Why are you risking your life like this? Why do you seek so much strength?" She wondered as she gently adjusted his messy hair before she took him back to her house in Konoha and put him to sleep in the comfort of her bed. But Bakurio didn't know any of this since he was having nightmares of fighting against countless slugs, and he would never know that this day would give Tsunade the strength to overcome her fears. After waking up from his deep slumber, Bakurio began analyzing the unfamiliar room he was in curiously before he stood up and felt a slight ache in his head. "It seems like I overdid it this time. This headache must be from me overusing my multitask ability," he thought, before he stepped outside the room and finally understood where he was. "This is Tsunade's home. Well, I guess it's to be expected to wake up here if not in Shikatsu Forest." Then, Shizune suddenly came running at him from out of nowhere and said happily, "Bakurio-kun, you are finally awake." Bakurio tilted his head slightly, finding her reaction a bit exaggerated, so he asked her, "How long was I unconscious for?" Shizune's eyes were slightly watery from her happiness as she said, "You've been unconscious for 3 whole days." Bakurio's eyes widened slightly before he nodded at her and said gratefully, "Thank you for taking care of me during this time." Shizune beamed slightly and ruffled his head in happiness in contrast to his annoyance as he asked, "Where's Tsunade? And how did I end up here?" Shizune found Bakurio's annoyed appearance cuter and her eyes kept lighting up more and more before she said, "Lady Tsunade was needed at the hospital. As for why you ended up here, Lady Katsuyu sent you back here after noticing that you were absorbing natural chakra passively and was fearful of you losing control over it since you were unconscious, and staying at a place filled with nature's chakra would only increase the possibility of this happening. That's true if I was a normal person, but most of the natural energy I'm absorbing is being absorbed by the system to regenerate its battery, so that would never happen to me," thought Bakurio, but he was still grateful for their actions that showed how much they cared for him and it warmed his empty heart slightly. "I see, I'm indebted to them," said Bakurio with a smile, and Shizune quickly shook her head and said, No, it's only normal, Bakurio-kun," before she quickly changed the subject and said, "By the way, Kakashi-san wanted to see you after he returned from his mission, but Lady Tsunade didn't want to worry everyone else, so he told Kakashi-san and anyone that wanted to meet you that you were still training at Shikatsu Forest." "I see, thanks again for covering up for me." After Bakurio said this, Shizune kept reprimanding him about his reckless actions and how he shouldn't make the people that love him worry about him, but he simply kept nodding robotically at her until she got annoyed with him and left angrily. "Sigh. This little girl is truly persistent," muttered Bakurio. Before he checked his system's notifications. "Congratulations on learning the Slug Sage's mode, Slug Sage mode level 1. Vitality plus 20, although it only increases vitality. At level 100, this Sage transformation grants plus 2000 vitality, which is crazy to think about," thought Bakurio in amazement before he activated this new Sage mode, and immediately, some small dark markings stretched from his forehead, and stopped at around his cheeks. But he could feel like his blood felt like it was coming to life, although it was only a weak sensation since the skill was still at level 1. "Right now, I have 3 Sage art," Bakurio thought before he quickly opened his Senjutsu window and saw his current progress: Senjutsu, Toad Sage level 67, Snake Sage level 100, Slug Sage level 1. It would take a while for all of these to reach level 100 even with my fast training speed. I will see if I can learn the rest of the Sage transformations before I decide if I should train the ones I have right now first or not, thought Bakurio before he quickly went to find Kakashi. After arriving at Kakashi's house, Bakurio noticed some sounds in the backyard, so he decided to go there, and he found Kakashi training Rin in her close combat and kunai handling techniques. They kept clashing and Kakashi would easily deal with any attacks she uses against him despite him not using his Sharingan, and Rin was slowly getting frustrated with it until she noticed a boy with long dark hair that reached all the way to his lower back and blood-red eyes with 3 tomo in them staring at them silently. And her eyes widened slightly when she noticed that the boy was as tall as her. Kakashi, who already noticed Bakurio's presence, suddenly stopped and said, "We will stop here today." Rin immediately nodded and ran to Bakurio and kept comparing height with him with a pout on her face. "Bakurio-kun, how come you are almost as tall as me?" Bakurio didn't know what to say to this. He can't tell her that when his attributes increased thanks to his close combat mastery reaching level 100, his body grew bigger as a result, so he only shrugged and said, "I eat healthy," which made Rin pout even more. "Bakurio, I heard you've been wanting to meet me, is that right?" asked Kakashi, all of a sudden surprising Rin, who stared at the two of them curiously, and Bakurio calmly nodded and said, "Indeed. Let's go to somewhere quiet." Kakashi smiled awkwardly while shooting the angry Rin a look, and she eventually said, "Brat, how could you chase me away like that? HMPH, let's see if this big sister doesn't teach you a lesson." Both Kakashi and Bakurio's mouths opened slightly as they thought, "Big sister?" And Bakurio watched as Rin tried to catch him in slow motion before he waved his hand at her and turned around to Kakashi. "Let's go." Kakashi nodded in amazement while Rin's face froze before she suddenly turned upside down and found herself hanging from a tree as a few chakra strings held her in place. "Quadruple A, how did you do that?" "Untie me!" yelled Rin, but no one responded to her as they both entered Kakashi's house, making her pout even more before she used a chakra scalpel to cut Bakurio's chakra strings. Although with some difficulty. "I will train harder just to teach you a lesson," she muttered with determination before she went to continue her training with even more determination. Meanwhile, inside the house, Kakashi and Bakurio quickly sat down facing each other as the former asked, "How can I help you?" Bakurio went straight to the point and said, "I actually have some questions for your dog. Summon Pakun, can you please summon him for me?" He needs Pakun. What for? Kakashi was puzzled, but he easily agreed and summoned Pakun, who immediately said with a frown, "Kakashi, what did you summon here for? Do you have a mission or something?" Kakashi calmly said, "Bakurio wanted to meet you. Please answer whatever questions he has." Pakun turned around and observed Bakurio closely, and he shuddered slightly when he stared at his eyes. "Brat, what do you want?" asked Pakun, and Bakurio simply said, "Are you related to the dogs guarding the gate of hell?" "I have a few questions regarding them." Bakurio noticed how Pakun shivered slightly before he quickly regained his composure and said, "I don't know what you are talking about, Brat. If that is all, I shall take my leave." Pakun was about to reverse summon himself, but Bakurio quickly caught him by his neck. "Little dog, what do you think is faster? You going back home, or me taking your life?" Pakun stared at Bakurio's devilish smile and cursed him internally. How in the hell did this boy learn about us? Even Kakashi doesn't know this kind of information. What's going on? Asked Kakashi, who didn't want to see a fight between his summon and Bakurio, and Pakun eventually sighed and said, "Even if you kill me, I will never tell you anything." Bakurio paused slightly before his devilish smile turned into a faint smile as he said, "I see, I admire your loyalty," before he let Pakun down despite his shock. "Please hear me out before you leave," said Bakurio, and Pakun frowned slightly as he put some distance between the two of them and hid behind Kakashi. "Bakurio, care to explain what's going on, and what's this gate of hell you speak of? And how does it relate to Pakun?" asked Kakashi curiously, seeing the frown on his summon's face. Bakurio nodded at him and said, "Kakashi, your little summon is no ordinary ninja dog. It's actually similar to Orochimaru's summon Manda or Jiraiya's summon Gamabunta. He's from a sacred ground that for some reason is protecting the gate of hell." Kakashi's eyes widened in surprise and he couldn't help but stare at his summon. "Is that true, Pakun?" But Pakun only remained silent as he stared at Bakurio warily, and the latter calmly said, "If you are wondering why I know all of this, the reason is simple. I actually learned this from the White Snake Sage." Pakun finally couldn't hold back his anger anymore and said, "What's that damn worm running his mouth for and interfering with our business? He should know that it's forbidden to tell about our existence so easily." Bakurio shrugged and said, "I don't know, nor do I care about his intentions. My only reason for finding more about your race is that I want to learn your clan's sage arts. I'm not interested in interfering with any duty you might have." Kakashi's eyes widened again as he asked, "You actually come from beasts with sage arts?" Pakun remained silent before he reluctantly nodded as Bakurio quickly followed and said, "If possible, relate my intentions to your sages, and I would be grateful if they agree to my request." I will, but don't have high hopes, we rarely teach humans, said Pakun before he disappeared into a puff of smoke. It seems like you didn't know about this, doesn't your Hitaki clan use these dogs a lot? Asked Bakurio curiously, and Kakashi simply shook his head and said, not any one of our clan members can summon a dog like Pakun, they have to be the most talented member of their generation. My father used to also have a summon similar to Pakun, but I never thought they actually came from sage beasts. Who knows, maybe there are certain conditions before they reveal this information. After all, these sage beasts have rigorous selection criteria to teach their sage arts to outsiders like me, said Bakurio, and Kakashi nodded in understanding. Anyways, I will leave for now, let me know if they reply, said Bakurio, but Kakashi suddenly stopped him and asked, what if they don't accept? Hearing this, Bakurio simply shrugged and smiled. Then I will just visit them with a few friends and see if we can talk it out. Kakashi felt his spine tingling thinking about Bakurio's friends, and what they could do, and he couldn't help but think, hopefully, everything will go peacefully, before he shook his head and went to find Guy to have a spar with him. After leaving Kakashi's house, Bakurio made his way to the Sarutobi compound to visit none other than Hiruzen himself. After stopping in front of the big house that belonged to Hiruzen, Bakurio calmly knocked on the door and the voice of an old man soon came from inside. Coming. Bakurio waited patiently until Hiruzen opened the door for him, and he noticed how surprised he seemed when staring at his appearance. This kid more and more reminds me of Madara, he thought before he said, Bakurio-kun, what brought you here? Let's talk inside, old man, said Bakurio, and Hiruzen calmly nodded before he took out his pipe and began smoking and waited for Bakurio to explain his visit. Do you know that your summon Enma is a member of a sage clan? Asked Bakurio directly, which surprised Hiruzen slightly, who asked, where did you hear that? It seems you knew, muttered Bakurio before he explained what he wanted to Hiruzen, who said, you want to learn their sage arts, huh? Well, it's not impossible, but it's not easy as well. What do you mean? Asked Bakurio, and Hiruzen calmly said, it's better if I let Enma explain it to you. Bakurio nodded and watched as a huge monkey suddenly appeared in front of them. It was the Monkey King Enma. Hiruzen, did you invite me for a drink again? Said Enma with a grin, but he was surprised when he noticed Bakurio's presence and said, yo, Uchiha brat, you are here. Bakurio nodded at him with a smile. They met during their fight with Danzo after all and fought together, so they can be considered acquaintances. Enma, Bakurio-kun wants to learn sage arts at the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit. Can you please explain to him how you guys select your sages? Enma was slightly surprised before he said, well kid, you are indeed talented, but there are a few things you need to understand. Bakurio calmly nodded. Please enlighten me. Before Bakurio threw him a bottle of sake that appeared from out of nowhere, Enma caught it in the air with a grin and said, I'm liking you more and more, kid. Now then, let me explain to you how our sacred ground works. Enma paused to take a sip of his drink before he said, first of all, there are 4 tribes in our sacred grounds, each with their own sage and monkey king. I'm the Monkey King of the Stone Monkey tribe. The other 3 are the Red Monkey tribe, the 4-eared Monkey tribe, and the Long-armed Monkey. Learn our sage arts, you will have to pass through 4 trials, one set by each tribe. Enma paused here to take another sip, and Bakurio calmly asked as he digested this information, what do these trials consist of? Enma observed Bakurio slightly before he said, kid, you shouldn't waste your time. Even Hiruzen, after all of his years of trying, still failed every time during these trials. At least they don't seem to be risky, thought Bakurio before he smiled slightly and said, well, I'm no Hiruzen, prompting the former Hokage to say, I can hear you no, but Bakurio simply chuckled at him. Fine then brat, each trial is different than the other. The Red Monkey tribe trial is the trial of life and death. It's the first trial you will have to go through, and it's going to test your survival ability when deprived of all your powers. The second trial is that of the tribe of the Long-armed Monkeys. This trial will test your will and resolve by tasking you with climbing the Mountain of Flowers and Fruits without any of your powers, while also shrinking you into a form as small as that of an ant. The third trial is that of the tribe of the 4-eared Monkeys. In this trial, you will have to face a mirror image of yourself that has all your abilities and can even grow stronger during your fight. The fourth and final trial is that of my Stone Monkey tribe, and this one will test your wisdom, as it requires you to showcase the ability to merge at least 3 chakra natures without relying on any Kekkei Genkai, and also has a verbal test. Bakurio's eyes kept widening in shock the more he listened to Enma talking, and he couldn't help but think, is he serious? But seeing how Hiruzen was smirking at him coldly and enjoying his predicament, he felt that this was far from being a simple joke. This was the reason no one was able to learn the sage arts of the monkeys. Even someone as talented as Hiruzen could only pass 2 trials. Bakurio left the Sarutobi compound while deep in thought. I didn't expect the trials to be so difficult, and these are just the trial. We haven't even talked about training the sage arts, but if there are such high requirements, it could only mean that the difficulty of training them will be sky high. Bakurio couldn't help but shake his head and decided to walk to his last destination, which was none other than Guy, who was the only person he knew that had a turtle summon. Locating Guy wasn't hard, he just had to ask the people around the area he usually trained in if they saw a green creep recently, and he was easily led to him. He was in a training ground sparring with none other than Kakashi. "Oh, Bakurio-kun, you are back," said Guy, who stopped his sparring with Kakashi with a smile, and they approached him together. "It has been a while, Guy," said Bakurio with a smile, and Guy suddenly said, "How did you grow so tall?" Bakurio simply responded with, "It's the power of youth," which made Guy chuckle slightly and send him his signature thumbs up, while Kakashi was shocked slightly since he didn't expect the usually cold Bakurio to joke around. When did they become so close? He thought as he saw the close interaction between the two of them before Bakurio suddenly asked, "By the way, Guy, I already approached Kakashi for a similar reason. Can you allow me to talk to your summon? I need to ask it about something." Guy didn't mind at all and immediately used the summoning jutsu without even asking for the reason why, which surprised Bakurio as well. But he didn't know that Mukai had been spending some time with Guy and training him, which caused the latter to feel grateful to Bakurio for introducing the two of them. After the smoke dissipated, a huge turtle appeared in front of them. His shell was red with a yellow underside and swirls on the top with markings around his eyes, which are also yellow, and he was wearing a standard Konoha forehead protector around his neck, and an orange bandage on his right front leg. "He definitely looks like a sage beast," thought Bakurio with a smile. "This is my summon Ningame," said Guy with a smirk as Kakashi began contemplating. Could it be, is Guy's summon also from a sacred ground? "Guy, what did you call me for?" said Ningame with a stern voice, and Bakurio quickly explained to him his intentions. "Well, kid, you will have to pass through our trial before you could learn our sage arts, although I suggest you do not try them," said Ningame with a stern look on his face, and Guy couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's the trial? Does he have to fight someone?" "No, we only test the heart before we teach our sage arts," said Ningame, and Kakashi couldn't help but mutter, "Isn't that simple?" Ningame shook his head and said, "For our test, you will have to enter the Eternal Chamber. A day in the outside world is equivalent to 1 year inside the Eternal Chamber, and you can only leave it after you finish the test, otherwise you will end up stuck there forever. This test is crazy, you shouldn't do it, Bakurio," said Kakashi as he imagined what kind of loneliness a person would go through inside that magical place that could actually affect time. "Loneliness, huh?" muttered Bakurio absent-mindedly before he said, "I would like to take this test, please. I can't miss this opportunity. There's actually something that could affect time in this world other than my system's ability. I can't miss this chance to see if something can affect my ability or not," thought Bakurio before he heard Ningame say, "Before that, you will have to gain the approval of our sage." Kakashi was about to tell Bakurio to reconsider it again, but Guy, who was silent all this time, suddenly held him back. "Guy, what are you doing?" asked Kakashi, but he noticed how Guy was gritting his teeth and clenching his other hand tightly to the point that his muscles trembled while staring at Bakurio's eyes that didn't flinch at all at the difficulty of the trial. "We need to grow stronger, or we will end up wilting and wasting our youth," said Guy before he left after seeing his summon Ningame reverse summoned Bakurio with him. As for Kakashi, he couldn't help but recall that his dogs were connected to sage beasts, and he couldn't help but mutter, "Father, did you know about this?" before he also left with a heavy feeling in his heart and a new desire. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the ninja world, Bakurio suddenly opened his eyes and he found himself in front of a huge palace made of gold. There were different types of trees on each side of the palace. On the east was a forest made of sakura trees. A snow-covered ground to the north with leafless trees. Huge oak trees to the south and multicolored maple leaves to the west. It felt like the four seasons were surrounding that golden palace, reminding the viewer of the passage of time, and Bakurio also noticed that this place was encapsulated inside a transparent bubble, and they were far, far underwater, and he couldn't even begin to understand how this place had light. Amazing, muttered Bakurio, and Ningame, who saw how moved he was by the beauty of this place, couldn't help but smile widely at him and said, "Welcome to the Dragon Palace, follow me." Ningame led him to the huge entrance of the palace, which was a huge gate, and Bakurio felt like it was similar to the shrines he saw during the illusions of the trials at Raichi Cave, although he was sure what he was experiencing now was no mere illusion. After approaching the Golden Gate, it suddenly opened on its own and a beautiful woman appeared from it. She had pale skin with long black hair that was tied into a loose ponytail by a white ribbon with bangs hanging above her forehead and blue eyes. She was wearing an ocean blue kasode that was belted with a white obi sash, and over them, she wore a loose and unbelted robe that had 5 black tomo inscribed near its collar. "Otahime, this visitor is Bakurio Uchiha and he wants to learn our sage arts," said Ningame respectfully as Bakurio contemplated, "Is she the hostess of the trials here?" However, he quickly got his answer as Otahime replied with a soothing voice, "Welcome to our Dragon's Palace. The Black Tortoise Sage already predicted your arrival and he wishes to see you." "I'm sure, why not?" replied Bakurio, who was extremely curious to see this creature whom he had no previous knowledge of, and it excited him. After walking through the great palace, they finally arrived inside a huge hall where a single black tortoise was lying peacefully over a huge lotus leaf inside a pool of yellow water. After they entered, the black tortoise sage opened its eyes and Bakurio felt a chill like he never felt before as he stared at the yellow eyes of the sage that seemed to look through his past and future easily. "This is the strongest being I have ever encountered so far. Even stronger than Kurama," thought Bakurio, whose heart was beating crazily. "Welcome to my Dragon Palace," echoed the sage's ancient voice despite Bakurio not seeing it open its mouth at all. "How old is this being for it to have such an ancient voice?" thought Bakurio before he replied, "Thanks, I'm sure you already know of my intentions for coming here. I do know your purpose today, as well as your future and past," said the ancient voice, which made Bakurio narrow his eyes slightly. "I know you don't like someone spying on you, but your pride means nothing compared to the safety of this world," said the ancient voice again in a provoking manner. "Oh, what a coincidence, your world means nothing to me as well." Bakurio had a cold and empty look in his eyes as he stared back at the black tortoise sage right in the eyes, and his 3 tomo began revolving dangerously, and Otahime beside him couldn't help but feel a chill before the sage said, "Kid, don't lie to me to test my powers, I know you care about this world." Hearing the sage say this, Bakurio's expression suddenly returned to normal, although Otahime felt like it wasn't a complete lie. That look couldn't be faked, she thought as she stared at Bakurio warily and heard him say, "So, can I go through the trial now?" The black tortoise sage shook his giant head before he said, "I first want to ask you a question." Bakurio smirked slightly and responded, "Why? Can't you already see my future and get your answer?" The sage's yellow eyes lit up slightly as he said, "There's no future in which you answer me honestly unless I reply to the doubts you have about my power." Bakurio gave him a thumbs up and said, "Oh, I'm proud of my future self," while Otahime glared at him silently. "I can see the future, but I can't understand the reasoning behind your actions if you don't say it. So kid, my question is, what do you think will happen if you meet an immortal?" Bakurio suddenly felt a huge pressure landing on him that almost took his breath away. "This sage is finally acting seriously," thought Bakurio with a serious look as he faced this giant monstrosity. Thank you for listening guys, see you in the next part.